the USA in prophecy, and I'll be quite honest, I've not seen the United States in any prophecy anywhere. Now, that being said, there is one that I now see how it's going to play out, that the United States is going to be the major factor in the prophecy. And that's Zechariah 14, verse 1 and 2. A day of the Lord is coming, Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Then half of the city will go into exile. So this is before Armageddon. This is when the Antichrist attacks Israel. Okay? Who is attacking Israel? In verse 2 it says, all the nations. How would we define all the nations? And I know most people say, well, every single nation sent in their military. That very well could be. It doesn't have to be like that. And I can see it set up in a different way so that it would actually satisfy the verse, however it plays itself out. Now, if I'm looking at the correct timeline, this is coming up in mere months. As in, the attack would be February 14th and 15th, one of those days of this following year, 2021. Now, I'm not saying I'm right because the Antichrist has not been revealed yet. So let's see how this thing can play itself out. For the past 2 years, I have felt that the Democrats would win the upcoming presidential election. And the reason I felt they would win the election is because I see prophecy and I know that they have decided that they're going to support Palestine and the Muslims and no longer supporting the Jewish people. Now, in Israel proper right now, they are scared to death because they know that if the Democrat wins the election, they've lost all support. So let's look at things as it pertains to the United Nations. Hopefully some things you may not have known about it. Did you know that Israel is the most sanctioned country in the United Nations? In fact, it has more sanctions against it than all the other countries combined. See some of these resolutions that they passed. Zionism is racism. Economic sanctions. The right of Palestine, the right to be a state, right to return, right to fight for your autonomy. Against Israel obtaining nuclear weapons, to allow weapons inspectors in to get rid of any weapons that they have. That's a constant. Calling on all nations to suspend diplomatic, economic, and technological ties with Israel. And of course, the normal is settlements in Palestine. Now, of course, there's also things about them attacking Syria, obviously the settlements, and of course, the Gaza Strip. These are constant. And there are 21 resolutions against Israel in 2018 alone. Now, this is the United Nations wanting to attack Israel if I were to take 21 resolutions, that's one every 2 weeks. They want to attack Israel. Why is the only reason the United Nations has not attacked Israel? Because of what's called the United Nations Security Council. There are 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. The United States, Russia, China, Great Britain, and France. Any one of these nations has the right to veto anything. So none of these things against Israel have ever passed because the United States vetoes them. It's the only one that's been vetoing. What's interesting is that the United Nations can go to war or send a peacekeeping force, which they already have a peacekeeping force in Lebanon, right across the Israeli border in Lebanon. They can send that peacekeeping force or use it to go to war as long as the United States does not veto it. They can abstain from the vote, and the United Nations would go immediately. The United Nations rarely goes to war. But examples of when they did, the first Gulf War in 1990 in Korea. The first Gulf War, as you remember, so many nations went against Iraq at the time. Now, why is this important? Because if a Democrat wins the presidential election, they take office on January 20th. On January 20th of that year, they appoint an acting ambassador to the United Nations. All the ambassador has to do, and that the acting ambassador is usually confirmed by the Senate usually within 10 days. It took 14 days for the one with Ronald Reagan. So that's not going to be a problem to get him even official capacity if they need to. Again, it takes a few days for the United Nations to see, uh-oh, things have changed, we get to go to war now. So they're going to be drafting up their papers against Israel almost immediately and having everything ready from the election so that when January 20th hits, they're ready to go. And again, they may wait just to make sure that that ambassador is in, but they're ready. Now let's look at this a little bit more. All that ambassador has to do, he doesn't have to vote for the war. All they have to do is abstain from voting. Now we also have the same thing from Zechariah 12:2, again, where it says, and all the nations, at the very end of the verse, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it. So again, all the nations of the earth, United Nations, sending troops, is every nation doing it. It fits the prophecy that what we have. Now let's look at the situation for the election. Biden is winning pretty much right now in a landslide. The polls this morning, he's up by 10%. He doesn't have to be up by 10%. It's a Republican versus Democrat. The Democrats are going to win New York and California. They know that. They're going to win Washington and Oregon. They know that. The difference in why Trump won last time is because people who would normally vote for the Democrats to disenfranchise the working poor voted for Trump. What's happened to those working poor? They're out of work right now. 41 million are unemployed. Now let's look at how the votes played themselves out a little bit. Because he barely won this thing. I mean, he won it by the Electoral College. He actually lost the popular vote against the most hated candidate probably in history, which was Hillary Clinton. Biden is an idiot. He's corrupt, but he's not hated. He's not like Hillary, who was hated. I mean, she was a walking piece of garbage. And in Florida, we have 100,000 votes. The difference. Are you telling me that 100,000 people aren't unemployed in Florida right now? And actually all you need is 60,000 of them to swing it. Because he barely beat her. It's a very competitive state. You tell me there's not 100,000 people or 60,000 people who are unemployed who voted for Trump who are not going to vote for him this time because they're ticked off because they're still unemployed. I think clearly he's got that. What about the other states? We've got Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a normal Democratic state. Hillary said, I'm not even going to campaign there. He won the thing by 18,000 votes. It was even with her not even going there, and even with her being the most hated candidate in probably the past 200 years, she almost won it. What about Michigan? Because Michigan's even closer. Michigan, she won again. She didn't go to campaign there. She's still the most hated, and she wins, or he won by 10,000 votes. It was that close. You're telling me there's not 10,000 people that are in Michigan right now that are unemployed who have said, listen, I tried it and it didn't work. And that's all that Biden has to do for a campaign commercial, is to say, you know, you voted last time, you would normally vote for us, you voted last time for the Republican. Are you better off now than you were? How many of you are unemployed? And whatever else somebody wants to say, Trump is the one who started the coronavirus lockdown. The Democratic governors have realized we get to use this for politics, so they're not going to let it go. Because as long as people are unemployed, they're ticked off. That's all that has to happen. So I wouldn't be shocked, in fact, if Biden appointed Hillary Clinton to be the ambassador to the United Nations, just so the evil could be there to go against Israel. But when we look at where we would be looking for America in prophecy, I think this is really the issue. And I think it's coming up. And we have an election just months away. And as soon as we have that election on November 2nd, January 20th, they're put into office. And the Democrat Party has already said we're the party of the Muslims now. They are very much against Israel. They're against the settlements in the West Bank. They're against what they're doing in Gaza, and they're certainly against what they're doing bombing Syria about every 2 or 3 days. So this thing is going to blow up very quickly and allow, shortly after the new president takes that election and takes the office, Antichrist gets a sweep in.